Jodian, you've been eyeing Wisynco's latest results. Their third quarter results are out. Share the highlights with us.
Sure. Just before I go in, I just want to say congrats on the book launch. I was able to
Thank
make it.
you.
Good job. Good going. So as mentioned, we'll be looking at Wisynco, and as we know, Wisynco Group is our leading distributor and manufacturer here in Jamaica, and so it's largely around bottling and distribution of water and beverages, as well as they also do a bit of distribution of food items. And it's mentioned we're looking at their third quarter. So they have a year end of June, which means that the latest financials for the period, March 31st, 2025, as you said, would be the third quarter of the financial year for 2025. So the performance for this year so far has been actually below expectations. So if we look at Q1, which would have been July to September, there would have been a slowdown in that first quarter in terms of profit. And this would have been largely driven by the decline that we have been seeing in remittances, as well as a softening in terms of visitor arrivals, which should have had a negative impact for the company. We moved into the second quarter, October to December, and then this trend persisted as well. And it was further exacerbated by the fact that we're seeing cooler temperatures in October to December, which is seasonal, but still cooler year on year. So that would have also had some impact in terms of the demand for beverages. And, when we now look at the Q3 performance, January to March, we continue to see that there are lower demands across all the markets for their products. And even though Q3 is normally the slowest quarter, there was a bit of mixed results. So the company pointed that they would have seen a bit of resilience in core brands. However, there was a dip in terms of demand from hotels and food services categories. So in terms of what we have been seeing from Q1, in terms of the softening of visitor arrivals, that has been continuing into Q3. And also for exports revenues, those were hampered by a bit of logistics issues in major markets. So even though there would have been a growth in revenue, so revenue growth would have been about 4.8%, we know that there was a bit of slippage in terms of the gross margins. And so that is not, as we talk about, companies who want to look at the margins. And so slippage is actually not something good. When we look at selling and distribution expenses, those are higher year on year, and that would have resulted in a lower net profit for the year. And so there was a bit more in terms of non-cash related expenses relative to last year. So primarily depreciation, because they have been doing a bit of expansion. And so we'd have seen that having an impact in terms of the bottom line. But overall, though, from a balance sheet perspective, Wisynco has always had a strong balance sheet. So there's good cash balance, there's low debt, and there is growth in assets. So we're seeing the expansion playing through. And, when we look at the outlook for a company like Wisynco, even though there are some headwinds from the microeconomic factors, such as the lower remittances and, the reduction in visitor arrivals, and that has an impact on consumer demand. On the upside is that there is a bit of ongoing capital investments in terms of the plant and property equipment segments of the balance sheet. So we're noticing that there's growth there, which means that the company is positioning itself for long-term growth. So, in terms of how it is that we want to look at stuff, we want to think of it in terms of what management is seeing and how they're looking. So I think part of management expansion in terms of marketing and sales would be a signal to us within the market that there is some amount of confidence in terms of future revenue generation, even though we're noticing that we're having a bit of higher operational expenses because they're doing that expansion currently in terms of the marketing. So they're preempting markets while it is that they're doing that expansion, which comes at a short-term cost, right? However, when you look from a long-term perspective, if there's going to be market expansion, then that could mean that there's potential for new products, which could boost, in terms of additional revenue streams. And as well as on the upside, we could actually see some amount of recovery in consumer demand. So there could be, a rebound in remittances. We could see an uptick in terms of visitor arrivals, and so that could have a positive spin-off for a company like Wisynco. I think what I'd really want us to focus on as investors is, even though there may be some dips in performance, and as you mentioned in the clip, ideally you want to buy when it's low. So buying at a point where a company is probably prepping for expansion is not a bad idea. So even though you may notice that, there's a bit of sluggish growth in revenue, or there is somewhat of a dip in net profit, you also have to factor in that the company is also making a bit of moves in the short term that could have a bit of a hiccup, but pressing forward for growth in the long term. And a company like Wisynco, which pays a good dividend, is very good in terms of while it is that you wait for that growth to come. So just to highlight that you want to look at your companies, not just that the bottom line is growing or increasing, but you want to look at the preparation that the company is also making in the interim, while it is that they're looking forward for future growth.
Interesting. But is the stock price reflecting these changes though? Because I know sometimes the Jamaican market can be slow to react to these types of things.
Well, I think part of it is that if you consider a company like Wisynco, when we would have seen positive price movements, it would have been at a time where there was robust growth in revenue and robust growth in net profit, and we'd have seen improvements in margins. And coming into a year that they have been having so far, where there's a bit of sluggishness in terms of revenue, there's a bit of continued dip in net profit. The market is reacting in comparison to last year. So there is still not an uptick in terms of the price, even though we're saying that on a future basis, there could actually be growth that is to come based on the fact that they're doing some expansion work in the current. I think you probably want to look back at a company like Lasco Manufacturing, which at a point was really having slow movement in prices, while it is that they were doing the expansion work. And so every quarter you read that they're doing more in terms of the expansion. But when that actually hits, then you start to see that pick up in terms of revenue and net profits. So if the market is not, picking up as yet, then it could be a good time as an investor to take that bet on something like our Wisynco.
So let's look at the stock price here on mymoneyja.com. They closed today at $20.53. 52-week highs, 22.50, 52-week low, 19.80. So we're just right around the middle point between the high and the low for the year. Somebody was asking about dividend yield. For 2025, they're at 1.12%, 2024, 2.24%. I like that all the data is just in one place on MyMoneyJA. So that's just a quick overview from that perspective. David, you are also looking at the Wisynco results. Did anything stand out to you different from what Jody has already outlined?
So the company, would have spent another $2.7 billion over the 9 months in terms of capex, capital expenditure. And we shouldn't forget that Wisynco, in the prior 2 years, Wisynco was basically maxed out in terms of supplying the Jamaican market. So, they're coming to the tail end of that expansion. So for one, you're actually going to see an increase in free cash flow, going forward, because the company will be doing this level of expansion, again, until probably another decade or so. So free cash flow is likely to increase. At the same time, we shouldn't forget the fact that Wisynco, still, holds a pretty strong balance sheet in terms of cash, marketable securities. So what I have to commend the Wisynco team about is that instead of just, letting the cash stay on the books as just cash in the bank, they put it in marketable securities, so bonds, equities, trying to earn a better return. And then even further, we shouldn't forget that Wisynco, would have acquired the Jamaican tea distribution rights in late 23. Wisynco, is still, a growing distribution company, and they're looking to add a new distribution warehouse, in the South Coast. They did pretty well in the North Coast in the Hague, Trelawney. But, one thing I took note of, when I read Wisynco's report was when they spoke, of the slowness that they observed in the market, it kind of, is indicative and observing other company results. So you look across the market, for different companies, you're just seeing a trickle down in terms of or I should say, a decline in general revenue for most companies. Whether you're in finance, whether you're in distribution, manufacturing, you're just seeing a decline in company numbers across the board. If a company has a subsidiary overseas that is probably doing better, the consolidated numbers are likely higher. But the slowdown in numbers, combined with the fact that we would have seen a decline in the air traffic arrivals, this year, through Sanctions International, is a little bit, a worrying sign. But this year, is a very active year because of a couple of things. One, general election in Jamaica. That is yet to be called. Now we're in May. July/August, probably going to have election.
Any day
And
now, because I'm seeing the campaigners out on the road, so they are gearing up.
no, and the thing is, think about it. You're gonna like to see more consumption, as you're having that kind of campaign activity. I need to supply certain divisions and so on and so forth. So whenever you see, campaigning period for the general elections, you start more spending in particular market segments, media, uh, consumption, consumable goods, and so on and so forth. So that's one factor. Second factor, a lot of persons have been complaining about the heat within the last week. Like everybody's saying they just cannot believe how hot it is. And we have not officially started summer as a season as yet. We start in a month's time in June. So they're going to see an increase or a relative increase in just, beverage consumption. The other factor is that Wisynco, well, I think Wisynco, but as the negotiations, in the USA along the rest of the world take place, and these tariff effects, kind of go away, it's like going and some level of stability in logistics. That's going to create a better runway for Wisynco to grow more revenue through its export business, because I didn't know Bigger was sold in the UK. You see it in other parts of Europe like Belgium and so on and so forth. So Wisynco as a Jamaican brand has a pretty good reach, and they're able to meet local demand without sacrificing the export demand anymore is a good sign. And the reality is Wisynco's stock price, it's a slow mover. Wisynco listed in December 2017 at around 7.85 per share. I remember when it went to finally to $10, that was around probably January 2019, during the 2019 stock price run up. The price would have slightly dipped, in the last year or in the $19 region. But otherwise, still a good for investors who watched IPO. The company is a lot bigger now, and the reality is Wisynco is not going to slow down anytime soon.
Yeah, so their high was 27.80 around July 2019. And they
I
had
said
another
2019.
peak 2019 July,
That was that
27
fun time.
$27.80. And they had another little peak here in May of 2022, $23. No, that's not it. $24.41.
As I said, everything is a season, because in 2020 and 2022, you really saw prices trending up in that period. And we think at the same time was seeing a general increase. But one other factor people should recall is that, or this is something that discussed very frequently, is that some brokers have restrictions against companies that's on the junior market in terms of how they allocate funds. So, in the case of Lasco Manufacturing, when they moved to the main market, some of the funds that were restricted, to not buy junior market companies could now actually buy Lasco Manufacturing as well. So that is one factor as to, why you'd have probably seen an increase in Lasco Manufacturing stock price, within the last 2 years after graduation. But through Wisynco, I'm looking forward to see, what's happening. And I hear that, there are some new exciting plans and deals that are going to be announced very shortly. So let us see.
Okay. Well, thanks for those updates on Wisynco. We'll definitely be watching that.